Bill Kipp here with Fast Defense. In my estimation, the #1 factor in effective self-defense is learning to deal with the adrenaline fear rush that everybody gets. No matter how big and tough we are or how small someone is, everyone gets this innate survival response. The problem is that without proper training, oftentimes that response can work against us instead of for us. Let me give you an example. I hate snakes, and I mean I really hate snakes. I've had some bad experiences with very venomous snakes in deep, dark jungles throughout Asia, and I've just got some pretty powerful conditioning around snakes. Well, I live in Colorado, and right now the rattlesnakes are coming out of hibernation, and they're really loving getting out and sunning themselves in the, in the warm sun. So I was out walking my dog the other day, and all of a sudden he was startled by something, and then I looked, and there, just a few feet away from us, was this big, huge friggin' snake. So I had an adrenaline rush. The first thing I did was I took a short intake of breath. Now, it seems like we're pretty smart creatures and we know how to breathe, but the first thing we do is we lose our breathing when we get in a stressful situation. So I stopped breathing. Well, that creates sometimes a cascade failure of events. What happens when we go into that fight or flight survival mode is essentially we lose a lot of our faculties. Technically, we're going from our high brain, conscious part of our brain, into our low brain, which we call our frog brain, and it's technically termed the amygdala. Now, that part of the brain has not evolved very far, so we lose a lot of our sensory capacity. We lose our peripheral vision, tunnel vision. We got to look at the problem. We lose our hearing. We get auditory exclusion. We get a distorted sense of time. Everything goes into slow motion movements. We lose our fine motor control. Okay, so all this stuff is happening inside. It makes it even more challenging to deal with the threat. Well, it gets even more complicated. All of a sudden, I'm not just dealing with this snake, but I'm dealing with my past trauma around snakes from 30+ years ago. And like it or not, this was a factor in this situation with this present snake. So the bottom line is, I'm not just dealing with this snake. I'm dealing with my shortness of breath. I'm dealing with the switch, so I'm not dealing with the switch of the brain. I'm not thinking very consciously. I'm losing a lot of my sensory capacity. And I'm also dealing with old conditioned triggers that are exacerbating the whole situation. Well, this happens with snakes. This is what happens in altercations. And not just out there in the dark alley when someone's threatening to kill us, but it can happen even in a verbal confrontation. Talking to a spouse about money, talking to a coworker. This sort of thing happens all the time and will trigger to varying degrees this adrenal fear response. So, it doesn't matter how much training someone has. Again, if we don't have the ability to deal with this innate survival response, we're not going to be able to deal with the situation very effectively. Now, the good news is there is help. The best way that we found to train people to deal with the adrenaline rush is through scenario-based training. Enter Fast Defense.